Ever watch someone you love practice emotions at 3 in the morning, like they're rehearsing for a role you didn't know you were casting them in? That's the moment my marriage began to die. I didn't hear it. I didn't walk in on it. I saw it, later, on a security feed I never imagined would become my only witness. My name is Marissa Sullivan. I was 41 years old then, running Sullivan Logistics in Nashville, 23 trucks across 4 states, a business built from a single battered delivery van my father left behind when he died of a massive stroke at 56. I'd spent 10 years rebuilding something from grief, debt, and long nights that smelled like diesel and coffee. I believed in structure, in numbers, in preparation. I believed I knew my husband. At 3:02 a.m., while I slept upstairs, Ryan stood in the hallway outside our bedroom in his nightshirt, facing the mirror. The camera's infrared picked up every detail, the way his shoulders squared, the deliberate tilt of his chin, the careful tightening of his mouth. He practiced looking afraid, then sad, then wounded. He paused, studied his reflection like an actor checking lighting, and tried again, this time with trembling lips. It wasn't a breakdown. It was rehearsal. I remember sitting at my desk the next day, watching that clip over and over, my pulse loud in my ears, my hands cold. The cameras had been installed months earlier for business insurance, 10 high-definition units, cloud backups, access logs, protection, documentation, peace of mind. They were never meant to record my husband learning how to lie convincingly. We'd been married 9 years. 9 years of shared dinners, shared stress, shared plans. I had encouraged his dreams when he talked about law school, paid for prep courses, helped with applications. When nothing worked out, I didn't push. I adapted. That's what partners do, or so I thought. But looking back, that mirror was the first honest thing he'd shown me in months. Because what I didn't know yet, what I was about to discover, was that every argument we'd had, every exhausted disagreement, every raised voice late at night, had been captured, trimmed, edited, and weaponized. That hallway clip was only the beginning, the opening scene of a story where I would be painted as a monster, and where everything I'd built, from my company to my reputation, would be placed on the chopping block. I just didn't know yet how far he was willing to go, before the cameras, before the edits, before the quiet calculation behind his eyes. There was a version of my life that felt solid. My name is Marissa Sullivan. I was 41 when everything unraveled, but this story starts much earlier, back when I still believed effort guaranteed stability. I grew up in Nashville watching my father work himself into an early grave. He ran a small delivery operation, one van, a handful of loyal clients, and an endless sense of responsibility. When he collapsed behind the wheel at 56, the business didn't stop grieving just because I had. Bills don't pause for funerals. Clients don't wait for closure. So I took over. At 31, I inherited debt, contracts I barely understood, and a reputation I hadn't earned yet. I learned logistics the hard way: DOT compliance, insurance audits, fuel hedging, driver turnover. I slept in the office more nights than I can count. I missed birthdays, weddings, anything that didn't involve keeping freight moving. By the time I met Ryan, Sullivan Logistics had grown to 6 trucks and a fragile sense of momentum. He worked as a legal assistant at Morrison & Associates downtown, smart, articulate, always impeccably put together. He knew how to listen in a way that felt like understanding. When I talked about cash flow problems, he asked thoughtful questions. When I talked about exhaustion, he made tea and told me I was strong. We started slow. Dinners after late shifts, weekends that involved spreadsheets on one end of the table and wine glasses on the other. He told me he wanted more from life, law school, his own practice someday. I admired ambition. I respected it. When he proposed, the ring wasn't extravagant, but it was intentional. I said yes without hesitation. Marriage felt like a partnership at first. I encouraged his goals the same way I'd wish someone had encouraged mine. I paid for his LSAT prep, twice. Helped him apply to Vanderbilt, Belmont, 2 others. When the rejection letters came, I didn't judge. I reminded him that timing isn't destiny. After the second rejection, he stopped working. He said he needed time to reevaluate, to explore other paths. I believed him. I wanted to. My business was doing well by then, local contracts expanding into regional ones, a warehouse purchase in 2018. Net profits that finally felt like breathing room. It made sense to carry us for a while. That's when the questions started. At first, they sounded reasonable, curious, almost supportive. How was the business valued? Why wasn't his name on the accounts? What would happen if something happened to me? I explained it patiently. The LLC structure, tax optimization, advice from our accountant, Tennessee law favoring single-member setups. My father had built it this way. Changing it casually could cause complications. He nodded, but his questions became sharper, more specific. He wanted depreciation schedules, equipment loan details, whether debt had personal guarantees, whether assets could be separated. I told myself this was marriage, transparency, planning for the future. I ignored the tightening feeling in my chest. Around the same time, his behavior shifted in subtler ways. His phone was always face down. Calls ended abruptly when I entered rooms. He positioned himself strangely during arguments, standing just so, pausing before responding, watching my reactions like he was collecting data. And that handbag. And $1,800 designer purchase he hadn't mentioned beforehand. When I asked if we could discuss big expenses in advance, especially with payroll looming and new trucks on the line, he accused me of controlling him. The argument escalated, voices raised. Stress spoke louder than intention. I didn't know then that moment would later be trimmed to 90 seconds. Stripped of context, my fatigue turned into cruelty, my concern framed as abuse. Back then, I still believed conflict was something you worked through. I still believed love meant honesty. I didn't realize my husband had already begun documenting a different story, one where I was the villain and he was preparing for an audience I didn't know existed. Looking back, the shift didn't happen all at once. It seeped in, quietly, like moisture behind a wall, no visible damage until the structure starts to rot. About 8 months before everything collapsed, Ryan started asking questions that no longer felt like curiosity. They felt rehearsed, structured, as if he were following an outline I couldn't see. He wanted to know why his name wasn't on the business insurance policies, why equipment loans were in the company's name only, whether the warehouse counted as marital property. I explained each answer carefully, the way I would to a lender or auditor. I wasn't defensive, I was transparent. The business had grown to 23 trucks by then, contracts across 4 states, annual revenue hovering around $3 million. Logistics is fragile at that scale. One lawsuit, one compliance failure, one bad quarter. Structure keeps it alive. But no explanation satisfied him anymore. He began framing his questions emotionally instead of practically. So you don't trust me? So I don't get a say? So if you died, I'd be left with nothing? Those questions cut deeper because they weren't about the business anymore. They were about me, about my character. At the same time, his daily routines changed. He stopped sleeping through the night, took long walks alone, spent hours on the phone with voices that dropped when I came near. When I asked who he was talking to, he smiled too quickly. Just friends, attorneys, research. Research. He said it like it was normal for someone who hadn't worked in months to spend entire afternoons discussing asset protection and business valuation. I noticed how he positioned himself during arguments, never pacing anymore, always standing still, facing me, hands clasped in front like he was presenting himself. If I raised my voice even slightly, his expression shifted, eyes wide, shoulders tense. I remember thinking he looked afraid. I blamed stress. My company was expanding fast. We were negotiating a pharmaceutical distribution contract across the South. Fuel prices were volatile. Insurance ate 12% of revenue. Driver retention was a daily battle. I was tired. I didn't notice the pattern until it was already established. Every disagreement followed the same arc. He'd push. I'd explain. He'd accuse. I'd grow frustrated. And afterward, he'd retreat, not to cool off, but to his laptop. What I didn't know was that while I was sleeping, he was logging into our security system. I installed that system after a warehouse burglary. 10 cameras, infrared capability, encrypted cloud backups. Our insurance premium dropped 18% overnight. It paid for itself within a year. The cameras covered shared spaces only. Hallways, living room, kitchen. Places I never imagined becoming evidence. One evening, after a particularly tense argument about money, I found him unusually calm, detached. He apologized too quickly, like he wanted the moment over. I accepted it gratefully. We watched television in silence. Later that night, I woke to the faint glow of his laptop in the living room. I asked if he was okay. Just organizing things, he said. I went back to sleep. Around that time, my operations director, Tyler Morgan, mentioned something offhand at work. "Boss, your husband asks a lot of detailed questions when he's here," he said carefully, "about contracts, insurance. What happens if you get hurt?" I laughed it off. "He's just trying to understand the business," I said. Tyler hesitated. "Most spouses are proud. He seems more strategic." I brushed it aside. The truth is, I didn't want to see it. I didn't want to believe that the man I married, the one I'd supported, encouraged, protected, was slowly positioning me as an opponent. The atmosphere in our home grew heavier. Conversations felt staged. Emotions felt delayed, like he was choosing reactions instead of feeling them. That was when I checked the access logs. Not out of suspicion at first, out of instinct. The system tracked every login, every file accessed, every download. His username appeared over and over again. 3 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, while I was at the warehouse, while I slept. He wasn't watching for security. He was reviewing us. And once I opened the first saved file on his laptop, once I saw a 30-minute argument compressed into 90 seconds, I understood. This wasn't fear. This wasn't confusion. This was preparation. The first file I opened was labeled Kitchen Argument 02. It was 92 seconds long. That alone made my stomach drop. I remembered that argument clearly. It had lasted nearly half an hour, long, exhausting, full of stops and starts, explanations, and apologies. What I was looking at now was a fragment, surgically removed from its context. The video began with my voice already raised. "You're being reckless with our finances," I heard myself say. No lead-in, no explanation, no mention of payroll coming due or the 3 Freightliner Cascadias we were negotiating to expand routes. Just my frustration, isolated. Then Ryan on screen, crying softly, asking why I was so cruel, why I treated him like a child. The clip ended there. I sat frozen, laptop balanced on my knees, the hum of the house suddenly too loud. That wasn't what happened. In reality, I'd come home after dealing with a driver accident on I-65, insurance calls, DOT paperwork, a warehouse refrigeration failure stacking on top of it. I'd found the $1,800 handbag receipt on the counter and asked, calmly at first, if we could talk about major purchases ahead of time. Cash flow in logistics is timing, not abundance. An unexpected expense doesn't destroy you, it destabilizes you. But none of that existed in this file. I opened another. Living room dispute 07. Again, less than 2 minutes. This one showed me pointing, my voice sharp, saying, "You're not listening. Cut." What was missing was my next sentence, because I'm not explaining this well, and that's on me. I kept opening files. Every single one followed the same pattern. Arguments that lasted 25 or 35 minutes reduced to highlight reels of my worst tone, my tired voice, my frustration stripped of cause. He'd captured the moment I exhaled too hard, the second my patience thinned. Never the hours I spent explaining, apologizing, compromising. This wasn't documentation. It was editing. My hands started shaking, not with anger yet, but with recognition. This wasn't impulsive, it was methodical. He'd logged into the system dozens of times over 8 months, reviewed footage, downloaded specific segments, built a library. Then I found the folder marked Notes, timestamps, reaction cues, comments like, "This line gets her defensive," and "Wait for raised voice." I felt cold all over. The final blow came from a file dated 4 months earlier, one I didn't even remember existing. I'd been at the warehouse that day, dealing with a refrigeration system failure that threatened a pharmaceutical shipment. Ryan believed I wouldn't be home. He'd invited his friend Monica over. They sat on our couch, my couch, drinking wine, speaking freely. "The trick," Ryan said on the recording, his voice calm and focused, "is provoking her to anger on camera. Judges respond strongly to that, especially when it's a successful businesswoman versus a frightened husband." Monica asked if he felt guilty. "It's not deception if she really is controlling," he replied. "I'm just helping the truth come out in a way the court understands." I couldn't breathe. They talked for nearly an hour. He laid out everything, how he'd trigger arguments, how he'd edit footage, how he'd frame the narrative. He talked about settlement amounts, about taking half the business, about moving to Atlanta and starting over where no one knows the story. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dark, listening to my own heartbeat. This wasn't a marriage falling apart. This was a strategy. And I finally understood something terrifying. My husband wasn't reacting to our problems. He was manufacturing them. I didn't scream. I didn't confront him immediately. I sat there, on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall until the sun began to lighten the curtains. Shock doesn't feel like chaos. It feels like stillness so deep it scares you. Every memory replayed itself differently now. Every argument. Every moment he'd looked afraid. I saw it for what it was, not emotion, but performance. Not hurt, but timing. By morning, my hands were steady. That scared me more than the shaking would have. Ryan came downstairs like nothing had changed, made coffee, asked if I wanted eggs. His voice was soft, concerned, practiced. I studied him the way I would a failing machine, looking for the point of weakness, the misalignment, the pattern beneath the noise. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little," I said. It was the truth. I'd slept in fragments, waking each time with the echo of his voice from that recording. Judges respond strongly to that. I didn't accuse him. Not yet. I needed to understand how far this went, whether this was fear spiraling into something ugly or a plan already in motion. Over the next few days, I watched quietly. He positioned himself carefully during conversations. He sighed at the right moments. When I disagreed, his shoulders tensed, as if on cue. One evening, I asked gently, "Why have you been accessing the security system so often?" The question was neutral, curious, controlled. He froze. Just for half a second, but I saw it. "I just wanted to feel safe," he said quickly. "You're always working. I'm alone a lot." There it was. The line he'd rehearsed. "I didn't know you noticed," he added, eyes glassy. "I guess I just wanted proof, in case something happened." I nodded slowly. That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me, realizing the person I trusted most was already preparing to destroy me. Still, I didn't confront him with what I knew. Not because I was afraid. Because confrontation without preparation is just surrender wearing confidence. Instead, I did what I'd always done when something threatened my business. I documented. I backed up every file from the security system, cloud storage, encrypted drives, physical copies. I preserved access logs, timestamps, metadata, everything. Then I called Daniel Richardson. Daniel had been in logistics for 35 years, built a 3-truck operation into a $60 million company before selling it. He'd survived 2 brutal divorces. If anyone understood both business and betrayal, it was him. We met at his usual steakhouse downtown. I didn't dramatize, I didn't cry. I laid it out like a report, edited videos, access logs, the conversation with Monica. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "Marissa," he said, "you're in serious trouble, but you might also have the strongest evidence I've ever seen in a case like this." He leaned forward. "The question is whether you're ready to fight, because once you do, there's no stepping back." I didn't answer right away. I thought about my father, about the company, about the years I'd sacrificed to build something stable, about the man sleeping beside me who thought I was naive enough to miss what he was doing. "I'm ready," I said. That's when Daniel gave me a name. Robert Chen. Expensive, Daniel warned. Brilliant, and he understands business. That night, I went home and watched Ryan sleep. For the first time in 9 years, I understood something with terrifying clarity. I wasn't married to a partner. I was sharing a house with an adversary. I called Robert Chen the next morning. He didn't waste time with sympathy. He asked precise questions. Dates, access logs, system specs, chain of custody. When I told him the retainer was fine, he scheduled a meeting for the following day and warned me, calmly, that once paperwork started moving, nothing would slow it down. Before that meeting, I spent an entire night preparing. I backed up everything. Again, cloud storage, an encrypted drive in the office safe, another drive I left with Daniel. Redundancy isn't paranoia when the stakes are this high, it's survival. 4 weeks later, Ryan made his move. I came home to find divorce papers on the kitchen counter, neatly stacked, beside a note written in his careful handwriting. He was staying at his mother's house. I was asked to relocate. The petition was 15 pages long. It accused me of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, intimidation, and creating a hostile living environment. It demanded half my business, the house, both vehicles, and monthly support payments that would effectively erase my income. I read it once. Then again. Then I sat down, because my legs stopped trusting me. Robert reviewed the filing in his office, his expression tightening with every page. "She's claiming video evidence, Yanya," he said finally. "Says you installed surveillance to monitor her." My stomach dropped. Within 10 days, our joint accounts were frozen. Her attorney, Patricia Dawson, one of Nashville's most aggressive divorce lawyers, filed an emergency motion claiming I might conceal assets or retaliate financially. The judge granted it. I had to borrow from my own business to pay my lawyer. That's when the damage spread. Drivers started asking if payroll was safe. Clients began checking in about financial stability. The Amazon contract we'd been negotiating for 8 months went silent. Word travels fast in logistics, especially in a city like Nashville. My operations director, Tyler, pulled me aside. "Boss, the guys are worried," he said quietly. "They're getting calls from Nashville Freight Systems, our biggest competitor. Distraction is deadly in this business. Perception alone can cost you contracts." Daniel called me that same week and said it plainly. "Your customers don't care who's right. They care whether their freight moves." Ryan's strategy became clear over the next 6 weeks. Therapy appointments with a trauma specialist. A protective order that forced me into a Marriott near the airport. Carefully worded social media posts about finding his voice. Even the Nashville Business Chronicle ran a brief mention of the divorce filing. No details, just enough to make people wonder. Every night in that hotel room, I reviewed footage with a legal pad and a timer. Every edited clip, every missing minute, every provocation. Robert hired a digital forensics expert. She confirmed it. Metadata proved the files were altered. Timestamps didn't match. Originals still existed on the server. 3 days before trial, Robert called. "They've submitted another video," he said. "You threatening him if he ever left." I knew the clip instantly, and I knew how bad it looked. On screen, I pointed at Ryan and said, "If you walk out that door, you're going to pay for it." What the clip didn't show was my immediate apology, the clarification, the laughter afterward about family stress. That's when it hit me. He'd made one fatal mistake. He'd forgotten that I controlled the originals. The night before trial, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed, shoes still on, staring at the city lights outside the window like they might give me an answer I hadn't already calculated. My phone was face down on the desk. I couldn't bring myself to check messages anymore. Every vibration felt like another contract lost, another driver thinking about leaving, another person deciding I was dangerous before hearing the truth. This was the lowest point, not the accusations, not the edited videos, not even the frozen accounts. It was the isolation. When a woman is accused of being emotionally abusive, people don't ask questions. They assume power explains everything. Successful, wealthy, assertive, therefore guilty. I thought about my father, how he'd warned me that building something meant becoming a target. I just never imagined the person aiming would be the man I slept beside for 9 years. At the courthouse the next morning, the hallway buzzed with quiet speculation. I could feel eyes tracking me, measuring, deciding. Ryan sat across the room with Patricia Dawson, dressed in soft colors, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast. He didn't look at me. Not once. The man who used to argue with me about grocery lists now looked like a stranger rehearsing grief. When the judge called the room to order, my hands finally shook. Patricia presented first. She played the clips, one after another. Me raising my voice, me slamming a door, me pointing. The courtroom watched in silence as a version of me took shape on the screen. Cold, aggressive, controlling. Then Ryan took the stand. His voice trembled as he described feeling trapped, watched, intimidated. He said the cameras made him feel unsafe, that he lived in fear of my temper. He cried at the right moments. I barely recognized him. For a brief, terrifying second, I wondered if the truth would even matter, if context could survive performance, if preparation could beat perception. I felt the weight of everything I'd built pressing down on my chest. Years of work, reduced to a narrative I hadn't written. When the judge called for a recess, I walked to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, breathing slowly, deliberately. I reminded myself of facts, evidence, originals, logs, timestamps. This wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about proof. When court resumed, Robert stood, and everything changed. Robert didn't rush. He began with logistics, neutral ground, dates, installation records, insurance requirements. He established that the security system existed before any marital dispute, installed after a warehouse burglary, and that I paid for it, maintained it, and held full administrative access. Then he turned to Ryan. "Did you ever access this system yourself?" Robert asked calmly. Ryan hesitated. I don't understand the question." Robert nodded, as if he expected that. He introduced the access logs. 53 logins over 8 months. Download records. File paths. Timestamps that matched the dates of the edited clips Patricia had played earlier. The judge leaned forward. Robert played the first complete recording, the one Patricia had shown in fragments. This time, the full 25 minutes. My raised voice, my frustration, and then my apology, the explanation, the resolution. The difference was unmistakable. One by one, Robert played each damning clip, followed immediately by its unedited version. The courtroom shifted, shoulders straightened, pens paused. Context did what it always does. It changed meaning. Then Robert introduced the final exhibit, the recording with Monica. Ryan's voice filled the room, clear and unshaken. The trick is provoking her to anger on camera, he said. Judges respond strongly to that. Silence landed like a physical weight. Patricia objected, admissibility, consent, relevance. Robert responded without raising his voice. Your Honor, the plaintiff has submitted multiple recordings made without my client's knowledge. She cannot claim secret recordings are valid only when they benefit her. The judge listened to the entire file herself, headphones on, eyes fixed. When she removed them, her expression had changed. This court does not tolerate manufactured evidence, she said, nor perjury. Robert rested his case. I stood, not to argue, not to dramatize. Your Honor, I said, steady, this wasn't a marriage documenting harm. It was a plan to create it. Every edit, every omission, every performance was designed to destroy my credibility and take everything I built. I handed over the final documents, logs aligned with arguments, downloads aligned with accusations, a pattern too clean to be coincidence. The judge didn't deliberate long. She dismissed the petition, referred the matter for further investigation. And with one strike of the gavel, the narrative Ryan had rehearsed for months collapsed. The courtroom emptied in stunned silence. No cheers, no gloating. Just the low murmur of people recalibrating what they thought they knew. Ryan didn't look at me as he stood. His shoulders, once hunched in performance, sagged under the weight of exposure. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered. Patricia Dawson gathered her papers quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Within a week, the frozen accounts were released. Within 2, Ryan was facing criminal charges for falsifying evidence and perjury. His attorney negotiated hard to keep him out of prison. He pled guilty to reduced charges, accepted probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. Law school was no longer a dream. It was a closed door. The business felt the shift almost immediately. The Amazon contract resumed, signed 3 weeks later. Clients who'd hesitated came back quietly. Some competitors' customers came with them. Perception, once corrected, travels just as fast as rumor. Drivers stayed. Payroll stabilized. The phone started ringing again, for work, not damage control. Ryan moved out of state within months. No announcement, no farewell post, just absence. The man who once planned to reinvent himself somewhere no one knew. The story left behind one that followed him anyway. I didn't celebrate. I cleaned up. I rebuilt trust the same way I'd built the company, slowly, deliberately, with documentation and transparency. 8 months later, I bought a new house closer to the warehouse, smaller, quieter, mine. The security system stayed. The hardest part wasn't the courtroom. It wasn't the money I nearly lost, the nights in that hotel room, or the way my name felt fragile for the first time in my life. The hardest part was realizing how long he'd been planning it. How carefully he'd studied my stress, how patiently he'd learned which words made my voice rise, how methodically he'd mistaken my exhaustion for weakness. But here's the truth I carry now. Preparation isn't cruelty, documentation isn't paranoia, boundaries aren't control, they're protection. Today, Sullivan Logistics is stronger than it's ever been. 27 trucks, 5 states, contracts built on reliability instead of reputation alone. I don't chase validation anymore. I build systems that outlast opinions. I still believe in partnership. I still believe in love. But I no longer confuse trust with blindness. If there's one lesson I'd leave you with, it's this. The people who underestimate you the most are often the ones standing closest, because they assume access means advantage. Sometimes the quietest preparation saves you. And sometimes the truth doesn't need revenge. It just needs complete context.